He just wanted to surprise his daughter at school lunch, but what he saw changed everything. A teacher, a tray of food, and a moment no father should ever witness. He thought it was just a misunderstanding. He had no idea the truth was far more dangerous than anything he imagined. This isn't just a story about a school. It's about lies, betrayal, and a father's fight for justice. Keep watching, because the ending will blow your mind. Donald Don Parker was a 42-year-old father living in the quiet outskirts of Glendale, Pennsylvania. By day, he worked as a regional sales manager for an auto parts distributor, earning around $52,000 a year. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the $1,200 monthly mortgage on their small 3-bedroom house on Maple Avenue. More importantly, it allowed him to provide for his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie Parker, who was the center of his world. Ever since Sophie's mother, Don's wife, Maria, passed away from cancer in 2020, Don had been a single parent, mother, father, protector, and provider all in one. Each morning he woke up at 5:30 a.m. in their modest home, packed Sophie's lunch with care, and then headed out on his 45-minute commute to work after dropping her off at Brookside Elementary School. Despite the 3 years that had passed since Maria's death, Don still felt the sting of loneliness and the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. At night, after Sophie went to bed, he often sat at the kitchen table beneath the soft glow of a single lamp, poring over budget spreadsheets and parenting books. Bills were tight. Between the medical debts left from Maria's treatment and everyday expenses, Don had about $200 left at the end of most months. He clipped coupons, skipped new clothes for himself, and drove a 12-year-old Honda with 150,000 miles on it. But he never let Sophie see his worries. To her, he put on a smile every morning, determined to give her an ordinary, happy childhood. Sophie was a bright third grader with curly chestnut hair and big brown eyes. She loved art class and reading adventure books. Most days she came home from school bubbling about stories her teacher read or games she played at recess. Don lived for those moments, seeing her smile, hearing her rapid-fire chatter about classmates and drawings. It reassured him that in spite of their loss, Sophie was doing okay. Her happiness was his measuring stick for how well he was doing as a dad. Still, there were small signs that not everything at school was perfect. Lately, Sophie had been coming home hungrier than usual, sometimes even a bit queasy. Don noticed she'd rush to the fridge after school, saying she was starving. A couple of times she had an upset stomach in the evening. He assumed it was just a growth spurt or maybe nerves. Sophie was a little shy and occasionally anxious, understandable given what she'd been through losing her mom. Don often asked gently if everything was all right at school, and Sophie usually nodded and said yes. She mentioned her teacher, Ms. Catherine Abbott, was strict but okay. Nothing seemed off on the surface. Don's own upbringing had taught him to respect teachers. He remembered his mother used to say, "Teachers shape who you become." So when Sophie mentioned Ms. Abbott was strict, he figured the teacher just had high standards. In parent-teacher conferences earlier that year, October 2024, just after Sophie's 8th birthday, Ms. Abbott had appeared professional, if a bit cold. She had steel gray eyes, was in her late 30s, and spoke in a clipped tone. She praised Sophie's reading skills but commented that Sophie could be daydreamy at times and needed more discipline in class participation. Don had left that conference feeling slightly defensive, as any parent would, but also wondering if he needed to be more firm at home with routines. He never imagined that Ms. Abbott would soon become the source of his nightmares. Outside of work and parenting, Don's world was small. His social life had dwindled after Maria's death. He occasionally grabbed a beer with his neighbor, Kevin Hill, a friendly middle-aged man who also had a child at Brookside Elementary. They would chat about sports or the woes of home repairs. It was during one of those chats in early March 2025 that Kevin mentioned something in passing. Have you ever gone to eat lunch with Sophie at school? They have this program where parents can join. On Fridays, Don hadn't heard of that, or maybe he'd glossed over it in the school newsletter. He felt a pang of guilt. Between work and everything, he hadn't been as involved in school activities beyond the basics. He had never once visited Sophie at lunch or been a classroom helper like some parents. That night, Don found the crumpled April school newsletter among the papers on his fridge. Sure enough, there was a blurb, Family Friday. Parents are welcome to join their child for lunch with prior arrangement. He looked at the date, Friday, April 11, 2025 was coming up. Don decided then and there that he would surprise Sophie by joining her for lunch that day. He arranged a half-day off work, marking it in his calendar with a hopeful excitement. The thought of Sophie's face lighting up when she saw him in the school cafeteria made him smile to himself as he washed dishes that evening. It felt like a chance to make up for lost time, to show her he was there for her in every aspect of her life. All week long leading up to that Friday, Don noticed Sophie picking at her dinner more, complaining her tummy hurt. On Wednesday night, April 9, as he tucked her in, he gently asked if she was feeling okay, or if something happened at school. Sophie hesitated, fiddling with her stuffed bunny, then said softly, "Sometimes the milk at school tastes bad in a mess. Abbott makes me drink all of it." Don frowned, brushing a curl from her forehead. "What do you mean bad? Like spoiled?" She just shrugged. "It's weird, kinda bitter. My friends say it's like metal or something. We all have to drink it though. MS, Abbott watches us." Don's concern kicked up a notch. Spoiled milk in the cafeteria. Perhaps the school got a bad batch. He promised Sophie he'd talk to the school if it kept tasting off. She quickly added, "Please don't tell MS, Abbott I told. She'll get mad." That made his chest tighten. He reassured Sophie that she wouldn't get in trouble for telling her dad, and if something was wrong, it was the adult's job to fix it. As he left her room, he couldn't shake the image of a line of 8-year-olds being forced to drink bitter milk under a stern teacher's glare. It struck him as odd, but he reminded himself not to jump to conclusions. Friday finally arrived. Don dressed a bit nicer than usual that morning, a blue button-down shirt Maria had given him years ago, wanting to make a good impression. He dropped Sophie off at school at 8:00 a.m. like always, giving her an extra hug and winking, "See you at lunchtime, sweetie." She giggled, thinking he was teasing. He hadn't told her he was coming, wanting it to be a genuine surprise. He spent the next few hours at work wrapping up tasks swiftly, his heart light with anticipation. By 11:30 a.m., he signed out and drove the short 5 miles to Brookside Elementary. Glendale was a small community, and Brookside Elementary was as familiar to Don as his own childhood school. A single-story brick building built in the 1970s with a large playground out back and a flagpole in front, it served about 300 children from the town. Don parked in the visitor spot and checked in at the main office at 11:50 a.m. The halls smelled of pencil shavings, floor cleaner, and faintly of today's lunch, whatever it was. He detected tomato sauce in the air. The secretary, Mrs. Nguyen, gave him a visitor badge and directed him to the cafeteria. They should be just sitting down to eat. Sophie's class usually sits at table 3. She smiled. Don's heart thumped with excitement and a touch of nervousness. It was almost like stepping into Sophie's world, a world he realized he hadn't directly seen since she started elementary school. As he pushed open the double doors to the cafeteria, the ordinary world he knew was about to collide with something he never saw coming. Up to this point, Don's life felt relatable and real. He was a devoted single dad, doing his best, and now taking a rare day off to be with his daughter at school. Little did he know that the simple act of joining Sophie for lunch would plunge him into a shocking discovery. Don scanned the bustling lunchroom, a sea of small children in colorful shirts. Clatter of lunch trays and chatter echoing off cinder block walls. He spotted Sophie's class sitting in the far corner. A grin spread across his face as he finally caught sight of his little girl, ponytail bouncing, tray in hand. She hadn't seen him yet. With eager steps, Don made his way over, anticipating the joyful surprise on her face. In a matter of seconds, however, that joy would turn into outrage and confusion. He was walking into a life-changing moment without any warning, and his ordinary world was about to be turned upside down. Don approached table 3 with quiet strides, wanting to catch Sophie off guard in a fun way. She was placing her tray down, chatting with her friend, a petite girl with braids. Before Don could call out her name, he noticed a mess. Catherine Abbott standing at the end of the table, overseeing the children. She had a carton of milk in her hand and a hard expression on her face. Sophie's tray had the typical school lunch fare, a scoop of spaghetti, a side of green beans, and that small carton of milk. What Don saw in the next moment made him stop in his tracks. Sophie was murmuring something, looking distressed. Ms. Abbott's face twisted in annoyance. The teacher leaned down and said in a low, stern voice, "Drink it, now." Sophie whimpered, "But it tastes wrong. Please, it makes my stomach hurt." Ms. Abbott's response was to snatch the carton of milk from Sophie's tray. In a flash, she popped it open and, to Don's shock, forcefully tipped it against Sophie's lips. Sophie flinched, turning her head away as liquid spilled onto her chin. "Don't you dare waste it." Ms. Abbott hissed under her breath, fingers gripping Sophie's shoulder to hold her in place. Sophie was crying, struggling to pull away. Other kids at the table stared wide-eyed, some looking down at their own trays nervously. The whole scene happened in just a few seconds, but to Don it was like slow motion. His little girl was being manhandled by her teacher, forced to ingest something she clearly didn't want. A surge of protective fury shot through Don. His vision tunneled, and he felt hot blood pounding in his ears. "What on earth?" Without even realizing it, he shouted, "Hey, get your hands off her!" His voice boomed across the cafeteria, cutting through the clamor. Ms. Abbott jerked upright in surprise, the carton of milk dropping from her hand and splattering on the floor. Sophie gasped and coughed, milk dripping from her mouth and onto her pink t-shirt. Her eyes were wide with shock and relief at seeing her father. All heads turned as Don closed the distance in a few strides. He yanked a handful of napkins from a dispenser and thrust them to Sophie to wipe her face. At the same time, he placed himself between her and Ms. Abbott, his 6-foot frame towering over the teacher's 5'4" stance. Don's hands were trembling with adrenaline. He struggled to keep his voice level in front of the children, but the anger cracked through. "What do you think you're doing to my daughter?" Ms. Abbott's cheeks flushed red. For a split second, Don caught a flicker of something in her eyes, not just surprise, but fear or panic, as if being caught. But it was quickly masked by a scowl. She straightened her blazer and responded stiffly, "Mr. Parker, this is not what it looks like. Sophie was refusing to drink her milk. It's school policy that every child drinks their milk for nutrition." Her tone was defensive, but there was a quiver in it. She avoided meeting Don's eyes, focusing instead on picking up the dropped carton with a shaky hand. Don could barely believe what he was hearing. His voice rose, unable to contain the outrage. "School policy, to force it down her throat. She said it tastes bad, and you make her drink it anyway." He put a protective arm around Sophie, who was clinging to his side now, her small hands gripping his shirt. He could feel her racing heartbeat echoing his own. By now, the commotion had drawn attention. Cafeteria aides and other teachers were watching from a distance, whispers spreading. A few kids murmured among themselves. The room had fallen mostly quiet, the normal lunchtime chatter replaced by tension. Don noticed out of the corner of his eye that one of the staff, the principal's assistant, Ms. Rainey, hurried out, likely to fetch the principal. Good, he thought, let the principal come. He was ready to involve anyone necessary to get answers. Ms. Abbott, trying to regain control, lowered her voice to a harsh whisper meant only for Don. "Mr. Parker, please, we can discuss this outside. You're upsetting the children." Don laughed in disbelief, anger still boiling. "I'm upsetting the children. What about what you just did to my child?" Sophie let out a little sob at that, and Don softened his hold on her, murmuring, "It's okay, I'm here." He dabbed the milk from her chin with a napkin gently, his hand still shaking. He noticed Sophie's face was pale and tear-streaked. His heart clenched seeing her normally bright eyes now filled with fear and humiliation. Before Ms. Abbott could respond, Principal Mark Stevens arrived, slightly out of breath, his balding head glistening with sweat. Principal Stevens was in his early 50s and typically a jovial figure, but now his face was drawn in concern. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice tight, looking between Don and the teacher. Don immediately spoke up, struggling to keep his tone civil. "I came to have lunch with my daughter and found Ms. Abbott forcing her to drink something that was making her sick." Stevens held up his hands in a calming gesture. "Let's all step into my office to talk this through. Ms." Abbott quickly interjected. "Sophie was refusing her milk, Principal Stevens. I was ensuring she got her required nutrition. She's a very picky eater, and we have to be firm." Her words were technically polite, but Don detected a rehearsed quality to them, like she was reciting an excuse she'd given before. That realization churned his stomach. Had she done this to Sophie or other kids on other days? Sophie tugged on Don's sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, please don't leave me." Don squeezed her shoulder. "I won't, sweetheart." To Principal Stevens, he said firmly, "I'm happy to talk in your office, but Sophie comes too. I'm not letting her out of my sight." Stevens nodded. Of course, of course." He tried a reassuring smile at Sophie, who only pressed closer to her father. They walked out of the cafeteria, leaving behind a wake of stunned silence and a floor speckled with spilled milk. Don's mind was racing. His world had just tilted on its axis. He went from happily anticipating a lunch date with his daughter to a confrontation with her teacher over what looked like outright abuse. But why? For a carton of milk? It made no sense. As they headed down the hallway towards the principal's office, Don felt a swirl of emotions: rage, confusion, guilt. Why hadn't he noticed something was wrong earlier? And a growing sense that something was deeply wrong here beyond just a picky eater issue. Sophie held his hand tightly, and he could feel her still trembling. He looked down and gently asked, "Are you okay, Soph?" She nodded mutely, but tears were slipping down her cheeks. Don's jaw clenched. He had to stay composed for her sake, but inside, he was downright seething and desperate for answers. If you enjoy shocking stories like this, please like the video and subscribe for more. This story is far from over, and the twists that come next will leave you speechless. In Principal Stevens' office, the confrontation continued. Don sat next to Sophie on a leather chair, his arm around her, while Ms. Abbott and Principal Stevens took seats opposite. A school counselor, Mrs. Lee, quietly entered and handed Sophie a juice box and a teddy bear from the nurse's office to comfort her. The gesture was kind, but Don was beyond simple comfort. He wanted an explanation and accountability. Principal Stevens cleared his throat. "Mr. Parker, I understand you're upset. Let's discuss this calmly. Catherine Ms. Abbott tells me there was an incident with the school milk." His tone was measured, as if trying to mediate a minor dispute. It only made Don angrier that they seemed to be minimizing it. "Incident," Don echoed, voice cold. "I saw her physically force my daughter to drink something that was making her ill. Sophie has been complaining about that milk for days. And now I find out the solution was basically to assault her." Ms. Abbott stiffened. "No one assaulted anyone. I was following the guidelines of the district nutrition program," she said, as if reciting from a manual. "We have strict requirements to ensure every child consumes their provided supplements and meals. Sophie has been skipping her milk frequently, and I had to be firm. Perhaps I was a bit overly strict today with you watching, but I assure you my intentions were only to ensure her health." Don narrowed his eyes. Something about her phrasing nagged at him. Supplements, and the way she seemed to know Sophie often didn't finish the milk. Was she monitoring that every day? "What do you mean, supplements?" he asked slowly, trying to keep his voice steady for Sophie's sake. Principal Stevens gave a quick glance to MS. Abbott and then answered, "The milk is part of a new fortified nutrition initiative the district is piloting. It has added vitamins and minerals to help with concentration and growth. It's perfectly safe, but some children don't like the taste as much as regular milk. We've instructed our staff to encourage students to finish it, though," he added, looking at MS. Abbott, "They should certainly not be forcing it." MS. Abbott looked down at her hands. Dawn caught that glance between Stevens and Abbott. There was unspoken understanding, as if they were following a scripted explanation. It infuriated him further because it felt like a cover story. If it's safe and just vitamins, why does it taste so bad that kids refuse it? Sophie said it tastes bitter like metal, and why on earth would you not tell parents about this pilot program? I read every newsletter. I don't recall any mention of changing the milk. Don's questions came out rapid fire. Principal Stevens folded his hands. Formula is approved by our nutritionist, Mr. Parker. It's an unfortunate side effect that it's a bit less tasty. We didn't want to worry parents over something so minor. It's to help the kids. As for MS. Abbott's methods, I will address that separately. He turned to Sophie with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm sorry you were upset, dear. I promise it won't happen again. You won't have to drink anything you don't like, okay? Sophie just buried her face in Don's side, not responding. Don felt a mix of relief and distrust. Stephen's assurance that Sophie wouldn't be forced again was good, but everything else felt off. MS. Abbott's unusual intensity, the principal's polished explanation of an unannounced nutrition program, it all set off alarm bells in Don's mind. His intuition, honed by years of negotiating deals and reading people and sales, told him something was being hidden. And that terrified him, because it involved his child and possibly all the children in that school. Still, what could he do right now? He was a lone dad sitting in a principal's office, having just caused a scene. They were giving him an explanation that, on the surface, sounded reasonable enough. A new milk with vitamins, teacher went overboard, won't happen again. Maybe an overprotective parent might let it go at that, albeit warily. But Don was not going to let this go. Not until he knew exactly what was in that milk and why his daughter was forced to drink it. He realized his hands had curled into fists. He relaxed them, gently stroking Sophie's back to soothe her. In a controlled voice, he said, I appreciate you explaining, Principal Stevens, but I want to see the carton label or an ingredients list for this fortified milk, and I want to know who approved it. MS. Abbott opened her mouth to protest, but Principal Stevens interjected smoothly, Of course, we can get that for you. Our nutrition coordinator has all that information. I'll email it to you by the end of the day. There was a brief pause. The meeting was clearly being wrapped up. Don had the distinct feeling they were trying to get him out of there before he asked more questions. Sure enough, Principal Stevens stood, signaling an end. Once again, apologies for the distress caused. MS. Abbott will take some time to reflect on better methods, and please know, Mr. Parker, the health of our students is our top priority. Don stood as well, keeping Sophie close. She hadn't let go of his hand for a second. He looked directly at MS. Abbott and said quietly, with an edge to his tone, If my daughter ever comes home scared or hurt because of something at this school again, there will be hell to pay. MS. Abbott flushed and looked away, but gave a tiny nod. Without another word, Don led Sophie out of the office. He decided right then that he was taking her home for the day. As they left, Principal Stevens called after him, Will mark Sophie excused for the afternoon. Take care. The principal's politeness did nothing to ease Don's mind. Walking through the hallway, Don felt dazed. In the span of one lunch hour, he had gone from a cheerful dad surprising his kid to an outraged parent facing a bizarre situation. Sophie's small hand squeezed his. He looked down. She was gazing up at him with a worried frown. Am I in trouble, Daddy? She asked softly. Don's heart broke for her. He stopped, knelt down to meet her eyes. Absolutely not, honey. You did nothing wrong. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm so proud of you for telling me it tasted bad. You always tell me the truth, right? Sophie nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Dawn wiped it gently. That's my girl. Don't you worry, okay? I'm going to figure this out. She wrapped her arms around his neck in a hug. Dawn held her tightly. Over her shoulder, he caught a glimpse out the glass doors of the school entrance. Ms. Abbott was standing down the hallway, half hidden by a corner, watching them leave. Her expression was unreadable from this distance, but Dawn felt a chill. He realized she might have been following them out, perhaps to eavesdrop or ensure they left. The instant she saw him notice her, she ducked away back toward the classrooms. That image burned into Dawn's mind as he carried Sophie out to the car. What was amiss? Abbott so afraid of them discovering. Why would a teacher force-feed a child a bitter milk and then hover like that? Something in Dawn's gut told him this wasn't over. It was just beginning. He gently buckled Sophie into her booster seat and decided to take her for ice cream despite the chill of early April. She'd had a terrible experience, and he wanted to replace that memory with a better one if he could. As she sat licking a chocolate cone a short while later, color finally coming back to her face, Dawn managed a reassuring smile at her. But inside, his mind was churning with questions and theories. He had a feeling that the answers, once uncovered, would be far more shocking than a carton of milk. That evening, after Sophie was safely tucked in bed, Dawn sat in the living room with his laptop open and a determined frown. Sophie had fallen asleep early. The day's ordeal had exhausted her. Dawn, however, was wide awake with restless energy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scene replay. Ms. Abbott's hand clamped on Sophie's shoulder, the milk forced at her lips, Sophie's tears. Anger flared in him anew. He knew he wouldn't find peace until he got to the bottom of this. On his laptop, he pulled up the Brookside Elementary parent portal and school website. He searched for any mention of a fortified nutrition initiative or special milk program. Nothing. The lunch menu PDF for the month just listed 1% milk, as usual. There was no disclaimer about additives. A Google search of the school district and nutrition program came up empty too, so they were intentionally keeping it quiet, he thought grimly. He then searched a mess, Catherine Abbott. A few hits came up, mostly basic info. She'd been at Brookside for 4 years, taught 3rd grade, had a master's in education. No obvious scandals or social media presence, her privacy settings likely high. He did find a brief local news blurb from 2022 mentioning Teacher of the Year nominee Catherine Abbott of Brookside Elementary. It described her as dedicated and innovative in teaching science. Dawn scoffed at that, feeling a pang of disgust that someone recognized for excellence could act like she did. As the clock neared midnight, Dawn scribbled down notes in a spiral notebook Maria had once used for recipes. He was constructing possible explanations, even theories to rationalize the irrational incident. Theory 1, MS. Abbott is just a bully. Perhaps she was one of those teachers who abused power behind closed doors. Maybe the milk was just normal, and Sophie was right about it being spoiled or something, and MS. Abbott was too proud to let a child defy her. If that was the case, maybe other kids had suffered too. Theory 2, extortion or favoritism. Dawn remembered he had not donated to the PTA fundraiser last month. The school had suggested each family contribute $100 for new library books, but Dawn simply couldn't afford it then. Could Ms. Abbott be punishing Sophie for his lack of contribution? Some twisted way to pressure him? He'd heard of teachers giving better treatment to kids whose parents were more involved or donated more. Maybe this nutrition program was a convenient cover for just harassing certain kids. Theory 3, personal grudge. Did Ms. Abbott have any reason to dislike him or Sophie personally? Dawn racked his brain. He'd only met her twice, the initial open house and the parent conference. At those, he was polite, though he did question her once on whether homework load was age appropriate. Could she have taken offense? It seemed far-fetched she'd single out his daughter over that. Sophie was a well-behaved child too. She never had disciplinary issues that he knew of. Unless was Sophie truly telling him everything? If Sophie had misbehaved or talked back in class, perhaps the teacher was retaliating. But forcing milk as punishment was a strange method. As he pondered, Don remembered something Sophie had said weeks ago that he'd brushed off at the time. "Daddy, Ms. Abbott makes me stand at the wall at recess if I don't finish my lunch." He had assumed it was standard practice to ensure kids eat enough. Sophie didn't seem overly upset then, just annoyed she missed some playtime. Now, in hindsight, it fit a pattern amiss. Abbott had an unusual fixation on finishing food or milk. Maybe she was just a fanatic about nutrition. Or perhaps there was an incentive. A dark thought crossed his mind. Could the school be getting funding or kickbacks based on consumption of this fortified stuff? Money can drive people to do awful things. The more Don thought about it, the more he suspected money was involved. Maybe the milk was provided free by a company in exchange for data on kids' health, or the principal got bonus funding for a successful trial. It wasn't a crime to have a nutrition program, but the secrecy and force were wrong. If it was above board, they would have asked parents' permission. Don's eyes narrowed. Could it be something as sinister as using kids as guinea pigs? But why would a mess? Abbott go along with that, unless she was getting something out of it too. Another puzzle piece clicked. Her reaction when caught was almost panicked. If she believed in what she was doing, she might have been defensive, yes, but that initial fear he saw, it was like someone terrified of being exposed. He started looking up Brookside Elementary funding and pilot programs. Buried in a school board meeting agenda from last year, July 2024, he found a single-line mention, Item 11, Partnership Proposal with Bright Horizons Nutritionals Pilot Enrichment Program at Brookside Elementary, approved 6-1. There were no details in the agenda, just that line and a Note C attached proposal. The attachment wasn't online. Don's pulse quickened. Bright Horizons Nutritionals, likely a company or initiative, and it was approved by the board with one dissent, 6-1. He copied that name into Google. A few hits popped up. Bright Horizons Nutritionals, Inc., a private health supplement company focusing on child development, based in Pittsburgh, PA. A press release from October 2024 about a partnership with Glendale School District to implement a nutritional supplement trial aimed at improving student focus and wellness. The press release mentioned a groundbreaking program wherein elementary students receive enhanced nutrition in school meals. But it was vague, not detailing ingredients, just saying it's all natural and safe. It quoted a doctor, Victor Hale, Chief Research Officer of Bright Horizons, and lauded Principal Mark Stevens for his cooperation. Interestingly, it emphasized that the program was privately funded and comes at no cost to the district or taxpayers. Don felt a sick feeling in his stomach. This was it. This was happening right under our noses. There was no overt mention to parents, but publicly they had touted it as a positive. Perhaps that press release was in some local paper he never read. He searched his emails for any mention of Bright Horizons from the school, nothing. So the school board and principal quietly implemented it, likely glossing over it to families as a generic nutrition improvement, if at all. What exactly was in these enhanced meals? The milk, obviously, but maybe other items. The green beans. The spaghetti. Sophie only ever complained about the milk's taste, though. Perhaps the milk was the main delivery method for whatever supplement they were testing. Armed with this new info, Don had a clearer picture, but he still didn't know the motive or if it was harmful beyond taste. He downloaded the press release PDF, which had contact info for Bright Horizons. It listed John Reed, CEO, and a PR contact. A quick search showed Bright Horizons was a startup, likely eager to prove their supplement's effectiveness to sell it widely. His mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Could it be that the company was using the kids to test a drug without proper clinical oversight? If it truly was just vitamins, why not be transparent? Maybe it included a stimulant or something for focus, akin to giving unprescribed ADHD meds to all kids to see if grades improved. That would be highly illegal and dangerous. Don clenched his fists. If that's the case, they were putting his Sophie and all these children at risk, all under the guise of nutrition. It was monstrous, but before jumping to conclusions, he needed evidence. The press release was something, but it painted a positive picture. He needed to know if there were side effects or incidents. Sophie's mild complaints and that episode aside, had any child fallen seriously ill? The press release surely wouldn't mention if they did. He recalled a rumor Kevin's wife had mentioned weeks ago. A child in the district, maybe even at Brookside, was suddenly pulled out of school mid-year due to a mysterious health issue. What if that was connected? Don grabbed his phone and texted Kevin, "Hey, do you remember which kid left school sick? I recall a rumor." While waiting, he kept digging. He found an old local parent forum, mostly inactive now, where someone had posted anonymously in January 2025. "Anyone notice kids getting headaches after school lunch? My daughter and 3 of her friends often come home complaining of headaches and fatigue. School nurse says flu season, but I'd..." There were a few replies, but none with answers, just other parents inquiring, and the thread died. It was a small clue, but added to the pattern. Something was affecting kids. His phone buzzed. Kevin replied, "Yeah, it was the Patel family's son, Arjun Patel, in 3rd grade. Heard he had a bad allergic reaction or something, and they transferred him to a private school. Parents were hush about it. Why? Arjun was in the same grade as Sophie, though not her class." Don remembered him. A quiet boy who used to play with Sophie on the monkey bars, suddenly gone after winter break. Allergic reaction or something more. Don's suspicions were hardening into conviction. He suspected that Bright Horizons supplement was causing illness, and the school was covering it up. And Ms. Abbott, for some reason, was zealously enforcing the consumption. Perhaps she was pressured or compensated for fidelity to the program. Fueled by anger and a sense of duty, Don resolved to gather proof. It wasn't enough to have theories. He needed concrete evidence to confront the school or even alert authorities. But first, he would confront the teacher directly and see if she'd crack. The next morning, Saturday, he decided to pay a visit to Ms. Abbott. He knew where she lived from a school directory, a small town like Glendale. Addresses weren't hard to find. Sophie was safe at her friend Lily's house for a playdate that morning. Don figured some normalcy with friends would help her recover emotionally. So with Sophie occupied, Don drove to Oak Ridge Apartments across town, where many young teachers rented. He parked across the street from the brick apartment building, heart pounding. This wasn't exactly protocol, but he didn't care. He needed to look the woman in the eyes away from school bureaucracy. Don found her unit, #3B, and knocked firmly. A moment later, the door opened a crack, latched by a chain. Ms. Catherine Abbott's wary face appeared in the gap. Upon recognizing him, her eyes widened, and she quickly shut the door only to fumble and unlatch it fully when Don loudly said, "I just want to talk. 5 minutes." She opened the door, arms crossed defensively. She was in casual clothes now, a sweatshirt and jeans, looking younger and less authoritative than in her classroom attire, but also visibly anxious. "Mr. Parker, you shouldn't be here," she said quietly, glancing behind him as if checking if he'd brought an army. Don stepped just inside the doorway. The apartment was tidy but sparse, a faint smell of coffee in the air, a stack of graded papers on the dining table. He noticed she looked like she hadn't slept. Dark circles under her eyes, hair unkempt. Good, he thought coldly, she shouldn't sleep well after what she's done. "You and I both know something's very wrong with what happened at school," Don began, keeping his voice low but firm. "I did some digging. This so-called nutrition program, it isn't just vitamins, is it?" Ms. Abbott's face went pale. She turned away, walking into her living room, wringing her hands. "You don't understand. I can't. Don followed a few steps. Help me understand. Did Principal Stevens pressure you, or was it someone higher up, Bright Horizons? He deliberately dropped the company's name to gauge her reaction. She whipped her head around, eyes flashing fear. How do you know about that? She whispered. Because I care about my kid, unlike whatever the people behind this are doing. Don snapped. He took a breath, trying to steady himself. Intimidating her might not yield answers. He softened his tone slightly. Ms. Abbott Catherine, I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to protect my daughter and the other kids. I know something shady is going on with that supplement. Please, if you have any decency, tell me what it is. Is it hurting the kids? She bit her lip hard. For a moment, Don thought she might actually open up. Her eyes even welled with tears, but then she shook her head vigorously. I can't, I'm sorry. You can't or you won't, Don asked, temper rising again. Do you realize an 8-year-old boy might have been hospitalized because of it? How many others felt sick? How could you keep forcing them? Why, Catherine? He rarely used her first name, but he hoped appealing to her humanity might crack her resolve. Her voice trembled. You think I wanted to do that? You think I wanted to see their faces when they felt bad? She sank onto the arm of her couch, covering her mouth with a shaking hand. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Don retorted, though hearing her quavering voice he sensed genuine remorse. So you did know it was making them sick. At that, Ms. Abbott closed her eyes as tears slipped down. At first, we were told it was just like extra vitamins, that's all. Then some kids started complaining of stomach aches, headaches. We were told it was just adjusting to the fortified formula. Nothing serious. She opened her eyes, pleading. I swear, that's what I believed at first. Then Arjun, he had an allergic reaction. Her face twisted, as if recalling something awful. He collapsed in class after morning snack one day in December. Seizure, it was terrifying. They said it was a peanut allergy, but he'd never had one before. Now, I wonder they took him off the program after that. Don's blood ran cold. She was confirming his fears. They lied to the parents, didn't they? Paid them off maybe to keep quiet. He probed. She gave a single nod. Rumor in the staff lounge was the Patels got a hefty settlement and agreed not to speak out in exchange for covering medical bills. The official story, even to us teachers, was unknown allergic episode unrelated to school. But by then, I knew. She wiped her eyes. I wanted out, Mr. Parker. I told Principal Stevens I didn't want my class in the program anymore after that. Do you know what he said? He said I could lose my job, or worse, that Bright Horizons could sue me for breach of contract. They had us sign NDA and participation agreements quietly. I didn't even read it thoroughly at the time. I was told by the principal it was mandatory district paperwork. I feel so stupid. She buried her face in her hands. Don was shocked at the torrent of information. But one thing stuck out, or worse, she had implied consequences beyond job loss. Did someone threaten you beyond firing? He asked softly. Ms. Abbott looked up, eyes red. She hesitated, then stood and went to her kitchen counter, retrieving something from a drawer. She handed it to Don. It was an envelope with no return address, postmarked March 1, 2025. Inside was a single sheet. Miss Abbott, compliance is not optional. Remember your brother. That was all it said, typed, no signature. My brother, he's in prison, she explained in a whisper. For a stupid mistake years ago, but I take care of his kids sometimes. This note. I think it meant they could hurt him in there, or make his sentence harder, or harm his family. I don't know. It scared me to death. Don felt a chill. This was beyond a simple school pilot. It was a criminal conspiracy. He realized with a sinking heart that Bright Horizons, or someone behind them, was willing to threaten and hurt people to protect their secret. So you kept forcing the kids, even knowing it might harm them? Don asked, unable to keep the judgment completely out of his voice. She flinched. I monitored them closely. I cut the dose in half for my class by only giving them 1 carton a day instead of the 2 suggested. I thought maybe a smaller amount wouldn't hurt, and it satisfied the logs we had to keep. She pointed to a stack of forms on her table. Don skimmed one. It had dates, each child's name, check marks indicating they finished their supplement milk at breakfast and lunch. See, I sometimes lied on these forms, marked yes even if a kid didn't finish. But if the district nutrition officer came to observe, we had to actually make them drink, or it'd be obvious. Falsified data. It was a twisted situation. She'd tried to mitigate harm while being forced to comply. Dawn's anger toward her cooled a notch, replaced by a grudging understanding of her predicament. Still, Sophie was put in harm's way, and he couldn't fully forgive that. But he realized Ms. Abbott might be his ally now. She'd given him real evidence, the logs, the threat letter, her testimony. "Listen, Catherine," Don said, choosing a gentle tone now. "I'm going to expose this. They picked the wrong kid in Sophie because I won't stop until this is shattered wide open. I could use your help. I'll do everything in my power to protect you from retaliation. We can go to the police, the media." "No," she gasped, eyes wide with panic. "You can't go public, not yet. They are too powerful, Mr. Parker. Bright Horizons is owned by some big conglomerate. I heard one of the investors is a former governor. These people have pull. If you just accuse them without solid proof, they'll bury you in legal cases or worse." She swallowed, voice small. "If they find out I talked, I'm scared for my family." Dawn realized she was right about needing solid proof. The logs and note were something, but likely not enough to convict a corporation. "Then help me get proof," he urged. "Help me get a sample of this supplement for testing, documents that show what's really in it. You know where it's stored." She nodded slowly. "They deliver packets of concentrate to the school kitchen. The cafeteria staff mix it into milk jugs daily. There are boxes in a locked pantry in the cafeteria storeroom. I've seen them." That was huge. If he could get a packet and have a lab analyze it, they'd know exactly what the kids were being fed. "All right, I'll get one," Don said resolutely. Ms. Abbott looked at him in disbelief. "How? The school is closed for the weekend and locked, and they keep that pantry locked too. Only the principal and head custodian have keys. Are you thinking of breaking in?" Don almost laughed at himself. A mild-mannered salesman turned sleuth overnight. "If that's what it takes. I know a guy, friend of mine, who's resourceful with locks." He thought of Kevin's cousin, Ray, who was a locksmith by trade and had a bit of a mischievous streak. "This is crazy," Ms. Abbott murmured, wiping her face, "but okay. If you manage to get it, I can maybe help identify what's in it. I have some documents." She went to her bedroom and returned with a photocopy of a document titled Bright Horizons Enrichment Powder Composition and Handling Confidential. Parts were blacked out, probably the proprietary formula parts, but there were chemical names here and there like Panax extract and methylphenidate deriv. Don's eyes widened at the latter. Methylphenidate is essentially Ritalin, a stimulant for ADHD, a derivative of it being given to all kids would certainly make them more focused, but also could cause headaches, appetite loss, even heart issues if not dosed carefully. And it was a controlled substance usually. This was evidence of a serious crime, administering a drug to minors without consent. "You keep this. Use it if you need," she said, handing it to him. "It's a copy I snuck from the principal's files when I was still unsure what was happening. I was planning to blow the whistle eventually, but I was just too afraid." She looked down in shame. Don gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing now. Fear is natural, but these are kids' lives. Thank you for trusting me." She managed a weak smile through her tears. "Thank you for caring about Sophie and all of them. I wish I had half your courage." Don left a mess. Abbott's apartment with a mix of emotions swirling in him. Anger at those behind this scheme, relief that he finally had a lead on the truth, and anxiety about what came next. He had no idea the truth was far stranger than anything he imagined, and that unveiling it would put him and those he loved in unforeseen danger. He had no idea the truth was far stranger than anything he imagined. With Ms. Abbott's reluctant help, Don now had a clearer picture of the real truth. The nutrition program was in fact a front for a secret drug trial on unwitting children. Bright Horizons Nutritionals, along with complicit school officials, were administering a stimulant-like substance, a derivative of a drug disguised in milk, to see if it improved academic performance. It was a criminal, unethical experiment. This realization settled heavily on Don's shoulders. He drove home from Catherine Abbott's apartment with white knuckles on the steering wheel. It was early afternoon on that Saturday, April 12, 2025, and the spring sun was shining innocently on Glendale. It was hard to reconcile the normalcy outside, kids riding bikes, a man mowing his lawn, with the dark conspiracy he had just uncovered. His little girl and her classmates had been used as lab rats. He felt a wave of nausea and had to pull over for a moment. Memories flashed: Sophie's face on Monday complaining of a headache, her barely touched dinner on Wednesday because of tummy ache, her crying as a mess. Abbott forced that milk. All those small signs now made horrible sense. Don slammed his fist against the steering wheel. Damn it, he cursed aloud, voice choked. He should have seen it sooner. He should have investigated the first time Sophie said something tasted bad. The guilt was overwhelming. He took a few deep breaths. Focus, Don. He couldn't afford self-pity. Sophie needed him to be strong and smart right now. He picked up his phone and called Kevin's cousin, Ray. Ray Jarvis was known in their circle as the go-to guy when you locked your keys in the car or needed help installing a security system or more off-the-record tasks. Don explained he needed to get into Brookside Elementary for an urgent matter and retrieve something, and that official channels weren't an option. Ray whistled low, but after Don impressed the seriousness, leaving out some details, just saying the kid's safety was at stake, Ray agreed to meet that night at 9 p.m. by the school's rear entrance. The custodian likely wouldn't be on duty on a Saturday night, and the security was minimal, just a basic alarm system, which Ray had ideas about. Next, Don contacted someone he never imagined he would, Linda Morales, an investigative reporter for the state newspaper, the Pennsylvania Tribune. Linda was actually an old college friend of Maria's. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Maria's funeral, but Don still had her number saved. If anyone knew how to handle a story like this ethically and effectively, it would be Linda. He dialed her, feeling a bit nervous. She answered on the third ring, surprised to hear from him. After some brief catch-up pleasantries, Don cut to the chase. Linda, I have a big story, I mean big, and I think kids' lives are in danger. I need your help to expose it, but I need proof first. Which I'm getting tonight. Can you meet tomorrow? She was intrigued and pressed for details. Don gave her a high-level overview, careful on the phone. It's about a company secretly testing a drug on schoolchildren in our town. I have a whistleblower teacher and documents. I plan to retrieve a sample of the substance tonight. This is serious. People are covering it up. Linda, ever the bloodhound for a scoop, agreed to meet Sunday midday, but she cautioned, be very careful, Don. If what you're saying is true, these are powerful people. Don't do anything risky. Too late for that, he thought wryly, but thanked her. At least he would have a reputable journalist ready to run the story once he had all evidence. That night, Don told Sophie he had to step out for a bit after dinner. He left her with his neighbor Kevin's family for a movie night sleepover with their kids, not wanting her alone if he wasn't back quickly. She was still a bit fragile from the day before, but a fun evening with her best friend Lily next door was a welcome distraction for her. Don promised he'd be back to pick her up by bedtime, though he wasn't entirely sure he could keep that promise. At 9:00 p.m. sharp, under cover of darkness, Don and Ray met behind Brookside Elementary. Ray, a lanky man in his 30s, with a perpetual grin, had a small toolkit and a device for the alarm. You owe me a case of beer for this one, he joked quietly as he went to work on the door. Don forced a tiny smile, but he was too anxious to truly humor Ray. Within minutes, Ray had the back door of the cafeteria open. He had also managed to temporarily disable the alarm by using an old master code trick. Ray had installed systems in many local schools, conveniently. Inside, the cafeteria was eerie in the dark. The faint smell of disinfectant and yesterday's lunch lingered. They clicked on flashlights with fingers over the lens to dim the beams. Don led the way to the kitchen storage area Catherine had described. Sure enough, a heavy padlock secured the pantry. Ray pulled out a set of lockpicks. "Keep watch," he whispered. As Ray worked, Don's heart pounded. This was highly illegal breaking and entering, theft, but he justified it as necessary evidence gathering to stop a greater crime. Still, every creak of the building made him tense, imagining police or some security person catching them. After what felt like ages, probably only 3 minutes, the padlock clicked open. They slipped inside the pantry. Don's flashlight scanned shelves of canned vegetables, cereal boxes, and there in the corner, several stacked boxes labeled with the Bright Horizons logo. He quietly moved to them. Each was marked with lot numbers and enrichment formula "keep sealed." He pulled out a pocket knife and carefully slit one box open. Inside were dozens of foil packets, each about the size of a sugar packet but slightly heavier, unmarked except for an ID code. He took 5 packets to have multiple for testing or in case one got damaged. Suddenly, Ray whispered, "Someone's coming." Don's blood ran cold. He heard it too, the distinct click of a door and footsteps echoing in the hall. It could be a random check by a custodian, or worse, someone who knew they might come. They quickly closed the box and relocked the padlock to not arouse suspicion later. Don and Ray ducked behind a row of dry goods shelves just as a flashlight beam swept into the cafeteria beyond. The pantry door was slightly ajar since they hadn't dared to shut it loudly, giving them a sliver of view. A silhouette of a man was visible in the cafeteria, scanning the room with his light. The figure called out, "Whoever's here, you need to come out. This is private property." It wasn't a voice Don recognized intimately, but it sounded like the head custodian, Jim Garcia, an older man who often cleaned on weekends. Don held his breath, clutching the foil packets in his fist, praying the man wouldn't inspect the pantry. Ray leaned to Don's ear and murmured ever so softly, "We have to distract and bolt." He subtly pointed to a side door in the pantry that led out to the hallway near the gym. Nodding, Don crept to that side door. It was unlocked. The footsteps in the cafeteria grew closer. Heart in throat, Don gently pushed the door open and slid into the hallway, Ray right on his heels. The moment they were clear, they sprinted silently down the hall toward the nearest exit. The adrenaline erased any second thoughts. Behind them, they heard the pantry door creak open and the custodian's startled voice. "Hey!" He must have seen movement or sensed something. Don and Ray burst out an emergency exit door, triggering a loud alarm bell. So much for stealth. They ran into the night, making a wide arc around the school toward the street where their cars were. The custodians' shouts faded behind them. They dove into their respective vehicles. Ray peeled off with a quick wave. Don took a moment to calm his shaking hands before starting his car. He clenched the foil packets in his jacket pocket. He had them, the physical proof of what the kids were being given. Now, to find out exactly what it was. Don decided not to go back for Sophie just yet. He needed to secure these packets and maybe hand one off to Linda, the reporter, as soon as possible, in case something happened to him. Paranoid or not, he felt eyes everywhere now. He drove straight to his house. Inside, he locked the door and went to the kitchen, carefully laying out the 5 foil packets on the table. They looked innocuous, like little coffee sugar packets, each stamped with a code and property of BHN not for resale. He sliced one open with a knife. A fine powder, pale yellow, poured onto a plate. It had a slight chemical smell, sweet and bitter at once. This was the stuff that had been poisoning his child. At this moment, the weight of what he was doing and whom he was up against sank in fully. A small-time father was about to challenge a corporation and possibly some corrupt officials. Don's hands trembled not just with anger now, but with fear for what might happen. If they had no qualms threatening a teacher with a prison-involved brother, what might they do to Don or Sophie if they knew he had this evidence? His phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Parker, we know what you took. Return it, and maybe we can avoid a problem." Don felt ice in his veins. They already knew. How did the custodian see his face and report him, or was MS Abbott under watch and they suspected her involvement? The speed was unnerving. He quickly called Kevin next door and said, voice urgent, keep Sophie over for the night, okay? I had something come up. Kevin agreed, unaware of the gravity, but it was safer Sophie stayed away from their house if someone was coming. Don then texted Linda, I have the samples. They might know I took them. Need to meet ASAP. She replied almost immediately, come to my office downtown now. I'll be there in 30. It was nearly 10:00 p.m., but she was willing to come out. Don didn't turn on any lights as he left his house and carefully scanned the street. A black sedan idled at the corner, lights off. That screamed suspicion. Instead of heading to his car in the driveway, he slipped through his back gate and cut through neighbor yards towards a different street. He circled 2 blocks and came out behind where he suspected the watchers might be. Sure enough, as he peered from behind a tree, he saw 2 men step out of the sedan and quietly approach his house, trying the front door. When they found it locked, one nodded to the other and they retreated to the car, perhaps to wait him out or call someone. Don's heart pounded. This was real danger. He needed to get out of there now with the evidence. Keeping to the shadows, he made it to a friend's parked car down the street. He happened to have a spare key because the friend was on vacation, and Don was keeping an eye on the car. It was an old trick from his city days, and he thanked fate for the convenience. He started that car, a simple Toyota, and quietly drove off without attracting attention. In the rear view, the black sedan remained by his house. On the drive to downtown, every car's headlights behind him made him tense. He switched lanes often, made a few random turns to see if anyone tailed him. It appeared clear. By 10:45 p.m., he arrived at the Pennsylvania Tribune office building. True to her word, Linda was there, alone on a Sunday night, lights on in her glass, walled office. He parked in the garage and took a back elevator up. She greeted him with a quick hug. She was an old friend after all, but stepped back to examine his face. Don, you look well, like you've been through hell. He gave a shaky laugh. I feel like it too. He immediately pulled out one of the packets and the photocopied document MS Abbott gave him. This is what they're giving the kids, and here's some documentation we might need interpreted. It mentions a derivative of methylphenidate. He also recounted in a more organized fashion everything he had learned from Catherine Abbott. The threats, the logs, the boy who had a seizure, the school board item, etc. As Linda feverishly took notes, Linda's eyes widened and her face hardened with righteous anger as the story spilled out. This is massive. This could be a front-page scandal that goes national. She said, then added, but more importantly, we need to stop it immediately. She agreed that simply publishing might not be enough. They'd need to alert authorities. But who? Local police might not grasp the complexity, or could even be influenced by local officials. She had a contact in the state attorney general's office, an investigator named Michael Chen, who dealt with public corruption. She decided to give him an early heads-up anonymously to secure interest. Linda also wanted to get the powder tested ASAP. It was late, but the Tribune had a small lab they used for some investigations, mostly for things like lead testing in water for stories. She took one packet and promised to have their lab tech analyze what he could overnight. For more sophisticated analysis, they'd send it to an independent lab first thing Monday. Suddenly, the office phone rang unusual at this hour. Linda cautiously answered, then put it on speaker at a man's request. A smooth male voice came through. MS Morales, this is John Reed of Bright Horizons. I believe you have something that belongs to my company, delivered by Mr. Parker. I'd like to discuss this. Don felt a chill at how quickly Reed had traced him to the reporter. Reed continued when no one spoke, Before you think of running a sensational story, know that Bright Horizons has the full backing of the school district and certain government partners. We are doing important work for education. If you proceed with stolen, context-less data, we will litigate fiercely. And Mr. Parker. Linda cut in sharply. Mr. Reed, are you aware you're on a recorded line at the Tribune offices, and that you've just admitted to essentially drugging children without parental consent? She was bluffing about recording, but it might spook him. A pause, then Reed's tone turned icy. Ms. Morales, be reasonable. The substance is a supplement, legally approved for trial under a waiver from the parents. A lie Don knew. We are helping children. If some unpleasant side effects occurred, they were minor and we took care of them. If you publish lies, we will sue for defamation. And Mr. Parker, you should be more concerned about your daughter's well-being than playing hero. Don saw red. He grabbed the phone. Is that a threat? You leave my daughter out of this, you sick. Reed chuckled, a cold sound. Just a friendly suggestion. Go home, be a father. Let the professionals handle child welfare. At that, Linda interjected with calm fury. We have enough evidence to bury you, Reed, and that threat toward a child noted. Now, unless you have an official statement, I suggest you contact our legal department. She hung up abruptly, her breath unsteady. They looked at each other. Reed's call confirmed much he was clearly nervous, but also connected enough to get that number fast. He's scared, Linda said, but also cornered animals can lash out. We need to be careful. She insisted Don not go home that night. Instead, she booked a hotel under an alias for him and arranged a security friend to discreetly watch over the place. She also made a call to her AG contact's voicemail, outlining the basics of the case and telling him to call first thing. She would not yet mention Don by name to them until they had more in place. Before parting, Linda placed a reassuring hand on Don's shoulder. We're going to get them. Just hang tight. Don't do anything alone now. I'll loop you in tomorrow after we test the powder and talk to the AG office. And Don, you're doing the right thing. Don nodded, gratitude and exhaustion on his face. As he left her office, evidence secure, he exhaled a shaky breath. He had allies now. The truth was out, at least to people who could help act on it. But he also knew the next 48 hours would be critical and possibly dangerous. He had pulled back the curtain on the real truth, and it was darker and more dangerous than he ever imagined. Make sure you're subscribed, because the ending of this story will blow your mind. Early Sunday morning, April 13, 2025, Don woke in the unfamiliar hotel room, disoriented for a moment. The events of the previous day came flooding back. He immediately checked his phone. There were several messages, one from Linda at 6 a.m. The papers lab found high levels of a stimulant in the powder, along with traces of a drug used to increase appetite likely to counteract kids eating less due to the stimulant. The combination was potent. More comprehensive tests were underway. Another from Linda at 8 a.m. The state attorney general's investigator, Michael Chen, was very interested and wanted to meet that afternoon with Don M.S. Abbott and any other witnesses. A voicemail from an unknown number just labeled private. It was a man softly saying, "You have no idea who you're messing with. Drop it, or you'll regret it." Don deleted it, heart pounding but resolve intact. They were trying to scare him off. It only convinced him further he was on the right track. Don called to check on Sophie. Kevin's wife said she was fine. They were making pancakes. Don promised to come get her soon. He decided Sophie would not return to school until this was over. He would explain something to her, perhaps saying MS. Abbott was in trouble for what she did, and the school needed to fix some things first. Before picking her up, he drove to meet Linda and investigator Chen at a neutral location. A conference room at a local law firm downtown. It was Sunday, offices empty, a quiet place to talk. When Don arrived, he was surprised to also see Martha Jenkins, the longtime cafeteria manager from Brookside, nervously twiddling her fingers. Linda had convinced Martha to come. Martha was near retirement and had been deeply troubled by the secret program. She leaped at the chance to make it right if protected. Next to her sat nurse Helen Brooks, the school nurse who had resigned. Linda had tracked her down too. Helen corroborated how she was pushed out after voicing concerns over increased visits of kids with elevated heart rates and nausea. And of course, MS Catherine Abbott was there, pale but composed, ready to testify to everything. Seeing Dawn, she managed a faint smile of solidarity. They were unlikely allies, united by the desire to save the children and themselves from guilt. Investigator Michael Chen was a sharp-eyed man in his 40s, accompanied by an assistant taking notes. Over 2 hours, he interviewed each of them, collecting the logs, the threat letter, the powder packets Dawn handed over too, keeping extras in case, and Linda's lab preliminary results. His expression went from professionally neutral to visibly disturbed as the evidence piled up. He confirmed what they suspected. There were multiple crimes here: reckless endangerment of minors, fraud, assault in forcing consumption, conspiracy, and likely bribery and violation of medical ethics laws. Because a corporation and school officials were involved, his office could claim jurisdiction, especially since state education funds might have indirectly been used. However, Chen warned them, "We have to move carefully. We want to catch all the snakes, not just the ones in the school. That means Bright Horizons executives and any officials who greenlit this at the district or state level. If we alert them too early, they'll lawyer up or destroy evidence." They discussed strategy. Chen proposed a sting operation. The school was likely continuing the program on Monday. If they could catch them in the act of administering it, with law enforcement present in secret, it'd be damning. Also, perhaps get someone to wear a wire when confronting Principal Stevens or even John Reed, to capture any admissions.
AMS?
Abbott volunteered softly. "I can do it. I'll talk to Principal Stevens in his office, try to get him to confirm instructions about forcing the kids or mention Bright Horizons payments. He trusts you." Me doesn't know I flipped. Her hands trembled a bit, but she was resolute. Dawn admired her courage, a stark contrast to the fearful woman he met the day before. Chen nodded. "We can wire you up with a small recorder." "Dawn, what about you? Would Reed or any big players talk to you if you confronted them?" Dawn recalled Reed's arrogant threat on the phone. "If I show up with, say, a hidden camera and confront him, he might just shut the door on me. But maybe if I pretended to be caving to his demand, like meet him to give back the evidence in exchange for something," Linda chimed in, "that could be dangerous. He could have goons. But if police are nearby, it could work to draw him out." They decided on a plan. Tomorrow, Monday, the AG office would send a few agents undercover to the school as state education auditors to be present. Catherine M.S. Abbott would covertly record her conversation with Principal Stevens in the morning. Meanwhile, Dawn would arrange to meet John Reed in a public place, ostensibly to hand over remaining packets and to talk. They guessed Reed would choose somewhere semi-private. Chen would have a team on stand by at that meet to intervene if needed and to tape the conversation. Martha, the cafeteria manager, also offered to help. She could pretend everything was normal and signal when they were mixing the supplement in the kitchen so agents could witness or sample on spot. Nurse Helen had records of student complaints that she saved copies of, which she provided as further evidence. With the plan set, Chen instructed strict confidentiality. They named the operation Schoolhouse. He assured them that by Monday afternoon, if all went well, there would be arrests and warrants served. That night, Dawn finally reunited with Sophie at home. He gave her a big hug and decided to tell her a simplified truth. "Sophie, you know how that milk was making you feel bad? Well, it turns out it wasn't good for anyone. Daddy talked to some important people, and they're going to make sure the school never gives that to kids again. MS Abbott and Principal Stevens might get in trouble for it. Tomorrow, you'll stay with Grandma." He had called his mother to come stay instead of going to school. "Okay." Sophie looked a bit surprised but nodded. "Are you in trouble, Daddy?" she asked in a small voice. Dawn smiled and stroked her hair. "No, honey. I'm helping fix a mistake, I promise, and soon you'll go back to school and it will be safe and normal, just like it should be." As he put her to bed, Sophie whispered, "I'm glad you came to lunch, Daddy." Dawn felt tears prick his eyes. Me too, he whispered back, kissing her forehead. In that moment, despite all the chaos, he felt proud he had done right by his daughter. Monday morning came, gray and drizzly. Don's mother arrived to watch Sophie, and Don headed out early. He had arranged via a text to read on a burner phone provided by Linda to avoid tracing to meet at 11:00 a.m. in a public park by a riverside. Don lied that he wanted to personally give Reed remaining packets and talk terms, as he didn't trust mailing or leaving them. Reed agreed, likely suspecting a trap, but perhaps too arrogant to refuse the chance to recover evidence and gauge Don's next moves. Meanwhile, at Brookside Elementary around 8:00 a.m., Ms. Abbott walked into Principal Stevens' office, her heart hammering but her face set in calm determination. Under her blouse was taped a slim recording device provided by the investigators. Principal Stevens looked up, surprised. "Catherine, I didn't expect you so early. Everything all right?" She forced a smile, closing the office door. "Mark," she began, using his first name as fellow staff, "I wanted to speak to you before the day starts. It's about the Bright Horizons program." Stevens stiffened slightly. "What about it?" he asked carefully. Catherine took a breath, recalling the coaching she got. "Get him to talk about illegal aspects, like lack of consent or any payments. I'm feeling very uneasy after Friday's incident with Mr. Parker. I think the program is causing problems. Maybe we should suspend it." She purposely sounded nervous to not tip him off. Stevens frowned. "We've been over this. You know what's at stake. Bright Horizons promised a large grant to the district if we show improved test scores, and we got funding from the state for being part of this pilot. If we pull out now, we could breach the contract. The board would have our heads." He had already said some key things: grant, contract, pressure from board. Catherine continued, "I know, but parents are getting suspicious. Parker might not let this go. What if he talks? We never got explicit permission from each parent, did we? I'm worried about liability, even my job." Principal Stevens sighed and stood, closing the blinds, maybe to ensure privacy, ironically giving the recording better acoustics. "Catherine, I shouldn't be telling you this, but you're safe. The superintendent and a state senator are backing this. They assured that any legal issues will be handled. Parents did technically agree to nutritional adjustments in the fine print of the enrollment forms." He walked closer, lowering his voice. "Off the record, yes, it's a bit of a gray area. But Bright Horizons is paying for our new computer lab. You saw the check. And they promised more if we deliver results. Do you like teaching with half-broken old laptops? No. Well, this is how we get upgrades. Sometimes to help kids, we have to do things a little differently. It's not hurting them. The formula's safe according to their docs." Catherine could barely contain her disgust at his priorities. She pressed, "Arjun had a seizure. Others feel sick. Are we really sure it's safe? And if Parker raises a stink, what should I do? He caught me forcing Sophie. I shouldn't have done that. But I panicked because of the audits." She was rambling intentionally. Stevens put a hand on her shoulder as if comforting. "I understand. Listen, I'm sorry I had to put you in that position. We're almost through this. The trial phase ends next month. If Parker or any parent makes noise, we'll cite the signed waivers and the board's approval. We have legal coverage. If they go to the press, our friends at the state will muddy it. Worst case, Bright Horizons lawyers will step in. They have deep pockets, so don't worry, you won't be hung out to dry. Just stick to the story. It's a district approved nutrition supplement, safe and beneficial. Got it?" She nodded meekly. Then Stevens added in a fatherly tone, "And no more forcing kids like that. I know they told us to ensure full compliance, but we have to be subtle. If a kid doesn't finish once or twice, that's fine. Just write that they did. It's more about the overall data. The optics matter. We don't want another Parker scene." He chuckled, as if it were a minor PR hiccup. Catherine's blood boiled at his casual dismissal, but she concealed it. "Understood. I was thinking, maybe we should get rid of those extra packets we keep at school, just in case of an inspection or something." She floated, hoping he'd mention where they were or what to do with them. "Oh, the extras, don't worry. After the final round next week, Bright Horizons will collect any leftovers for disposal. Just keep them locked up till then. I have the only key besides maintenance." And Jim's loyal. Stephen seemed quite confident and smug now, likely thinking he'd calmed a nervous teacher. Catherine had what she needed. On tape, he had admitted to bribes grant for results, influential backers, knowledge of lack of explicit parent consent, gray area, instructing staff to falsify logs if needed, and prioritizing hiding evidence packets. It was damning. She left the office soon after on the pretense of preparing for class, her heart racing with triumph. She made eye contact with a woman in the hallway wearing a visitor badge. This was one of the undercover agents, and gave a slight nod, the signal that she got it. Within minutes, that agent discreetly collected the recorder via a pass. Off, Catherine put it in a folder and dropped it near the agent who picked it up. Simultaneously, Martha, the cafeteria manager, led a state auditor, another agent, into the kitchen for an inspection of inventory. Where they were able to open the locked pantry, Martha had an excuse to open it for them and photographed the boxes of Bright Horizons formula. The agent took one packet as well, labeling it evidence. The cafeteria staff were told it was a routine check. No one suspected a thing. By 10:30 a.m., Investigator Chen had enough for a search warrant and arrest orders for at least Principal Stevens, possibly the superintendent, and certainly Bright Horizons execs. Now it was up to Don's part luring John Reed out. At 11:00 a.m. under the drizzly sky, Don stood at Riverside Park by a bench, trying to appear anxious and cowed. In his pocket, he had one of the foil packets for show and a small wireless mic taped under his shirt. Across the park, in an unmarked van, 2 agents and Investigator Chen listened in and had a camera ready. A couple of uniformed police were also discreetly nearby in plain clothes, ready to intervene if Reed brought muscle. A black BMW pulled up in the adjacent parking lot. Out stepped John Reed in a black trench coat, looking every bit the corporate shark. With him was another man, burly, likely a bodyguard. They walked to Don. Reed gave a thin smile. "Mr. Parker, I'm glad you reconsidered a meeting." His eyes flicked around, wary. "Where are the packets?" Don patted his jacket. "I have them right here. All I want is assurance my daughter and I won't be harmed or bothered, and maybe some compensation for the trouble." He hated saying it, but he knew appealing to greed might make Reed let his guard down. Reed raised an eyebrow. "So you've decided to negotiate. Interesting. That reporter friend of yours seemed less flexible." He signaled his guard, who stepped forward and patted Don down for weapons. Finding none except the packet, the guard took it and handed it to Reed. Reed examined it, satisfied it was genuine. "Mr. Parker, you've caused us a great deal of inconvenience," Reed said almost conversationally. "But I'm a reasonable man. I can ensure a generous settlement for you. Let's say $100 for your daughter's college fund, and a non-disclosure agreement for you to sign today. In return, you give me any other copies of data, and you publicly retract any negative statements you made on social media or to anyone about this program. We'll say it was a misunderstanding." Don's heart pounded with anger at the bribe, but he forced himself to appear tempted. "That's a lot of money." He swallowed. "How do I know you won't go after us anyway later?" Reed put on a convincing smile. "Because, Don, may I call you Don? If you play ball, you become an asset, not a threat. We prefer carrots to sticks when possible. It looks better for everyone. Believe me, we don't want to hurt anyone. We're just trying to do business and help schools. Sometimes people get the wrong idea, as you did." Don nodded slowly. "I did think maybe I overreacted. Sophie is fine after all. Okay, this sounds fair." He felt a drop of sweat on his back. "I have some documents, too, I can give you. They're in my car." He motioned to his parked car about 50 feet away. The plan was to draw Reed nearer to the van where the agents could intervene more easily, or if Reed demanded to see the docs, to catch his reaction on tape as he reviewed them. Reed and the guard followed him towards the car. Don fumbled with his keys deliberately. "In the trunk," he said. As he opened the trunk, Reed stepped forward to peer in for the supposed documents. That's when Investigator Chen and the officers made their move. They approached swiftly from behind. "State police, hands where I can see them," one shouted. Another yelled, "John Reed, you are under arrest." Reed spun around, eyes blazing with realization he'd been trapped. The burly guard reached into his jacket for a weapon, presumably. But seeing multiple guns drawn on him, he thought better and raised his hands. Reed sneered. "On what charges?" "Trying to keep cool." Chen stepped forward, showing badge. "Multiple charges. Conspiracy to endanger children, assault, fraud, just for starters. We have your entire operation at Brookside on tape." Reed's face went ashen, but he forced a smirk. "This is absurd. My lawyers, they can meet you at the arraignment." Chen cut him off as an officer pulled Reed's hands behind and cuffed him. Reed winced, then looked at Don with pure venom. "You'll pay for this." He spat. Don felt a mixture of triumph and fear at that glare. He mustered, "Sometimes doing the right thing has a price. I'm willing to pay it. You enjoy your day in court, Mr. Reed." It was a borrowed bravado. Inside, his adrenaline was crashing, and he was just relieved this confrontation ended without violence. The guard was also cuffed, illegal weapon found on him, as suspected. As they were led away to police cruisers, Reed started shouting about calling a certain senator, which only further incriminated him, implying political ties. Within the next hour, events unfolded rapidly. Principal Stevens was arrested at the school, escorted out in front of stunned staff and children, including Sophie's classmates who watched their principal led to a squad car. He was reportedly in disbelief, claiming innocence at first until they mentioned the audio recording, at which point he just slumped. A warrant was executed at the school district's main office, where the superintendent was also taken in for questioning, along with seizure of documents and emails. The Bright Horizons office in Pittsburgh was raided by law enforcement. Dr. Victor Hale and a couple of project managers were detained. Catherine M.S. Abbott later recounted how a hush fell over Brookside as news spread of the arrests. Teachers were told to keep calm and continue class, but the rumor mill was flying. Some teacher aides had seen agents bagging the supplement boxes from the kitchen. It was no secret by end of day that something very wrong had been going on with the lunch program. Shocked and angry parents began blowing up the school phone line as word leaked out. Some kid texted their mom about principal in handcuffs. The district had to send a vague message. There has been an incident regarding a nutrition pilot program. All such programs are suspended pending investigation. Students are safe. Which of course did little to quell fears. For Don, that Monday was one of the longest days of his life. But by evening, he finally felt the tide turning. He met with Chen and Linda one more time to debrief. Linda was preparing her article now that arrests were made and it was public record. She interviewed Don on the record this time for the human angle of the story, though she promised to not use Sophie's name to protect the child's privacy, referring to her as a student, or using first name only with permission, MS. Abbott and the other staff whistleblowers were heralded in the story as well for their courage to come forward, though Catherine opted to be mentioned under an alias initially, a third-grade teacher, to avoid immediate backlash until things settled. That night's local news led with school lunch program scandal. Company accused of using students as test subjects. Principal and executives arrested. The story quickly picked up national attention due to the sensational elements. When Don watched the segment on TV with Sophie playing in the next room, he felt an immense sense of relief and exhaustion. It was over. The bad guys were caught. His daughter and all the children were safe from this scheme. He allowed himself a rare glass of whiskey as he sat at the kitchen table, emotionally decompressing. In his mind, he saw Maria's gentle smile. "I did it, honey. I protected her," he thought, hoping somehow his late wife knew. Tears of relief filled his eyes, and he didn't hold them back. It had been a harrowing few days, but justice was on its way. Climax and verdict, justice is served. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they did turn. Over the next several months, The investigation expanded. More charges were filed as evidence mounted. The district superintendent was charged with fraud and conspiracy for approving the secret program in exchange for promised funding and a personal kickback. They found he had $50,000 from Bright Horizons deposited in an offshore account. Senator Alan Pierce, the state senator Reid had alluded to, quietly resigned in June 2025 after it came to light. He had facilitated state education waivers for the trial in return for campaign contributions from Bright Horizons' parent investors. He was later indicted as well. Bright Horizons Nutritionals collapsed under the scandal. CEO John Reid and Dr. Victor Hale faced federal charges related to unauthorized human experimentation and endangerment. Other lower employees turned state's witnesses in exchange for leniency, revealing internal emails that they knew the supplement caused side effects but continued anyway to gather data. The case went to trial in early fall 2025. It was a high-profile trial that garnered national media coverage, with Don often at the center in news articles as the father who blew the whistle. Despite offers to settle out of court, Bright Horizons lawyers tried to settle with a fund for affected families in exchange for dropping charges. The state pressed on with criminal prosecution. Don testified in court, recounting the moment in the cafeteria and the entire journey afterward. His voice shook as he described seeing Sophie with milk forced down her throat, the fear in her eyes. The courtroom was silent as he then detailed the threats he received, the break-in to get evidence, and the relief of seeing justice catch up. Jury members were seen shaking their heads in anger at the defendant's actions. Catherine Abbott also took the stand, voice quavering as she publicly apologized for her role and then firmly condemned the pressure and threats from her superiors that drove her to it. She presented the threat letter and her secret logs showing she often spared kids full doses. Those details actually helped many on the jury see her more as another victim and key witness than a perpetrator. Perhaps most heartbreaking was the testimony of Mrs. Patel, the mother of little Arjun who had suffered the seizure. She described the terror of nearly losing her child and how they were quietly paid off and made to sign an NDA. She admitted she was ashamed for staying silent until now, but didn't want anyone else to go through that. Her eyes bore holes in Reid as she stated, "You treated my son like a lab rat, not a child." John Reid sat at the defense table looking increasingly gaunt and defeated as witness after witness damned him. His high-priced lawyers tried various tactics, claiming it was all approved by the district, so shifting blame, that the supplement was safe and any issues were coincidental, even suggesting at one point that Don exaggerated what he saw due to being an overprotective, traumatized widower. That last insinuation angered many. Don's character and motives were sterling clear. The climax of the trial was when the prosecution played the recordings, Principal Stevens' conversation and Reid's own phone threat to Linda and Don, since the Tribune recorded the call from their end after all. Hearing Reid say, "We will litigate fiercely," and the thinly veiled threat to Sophie in his own voice basically demolished any sympathy the jury might have had for him. Stevens' recording exposed the corruption and cover-up plainly, mentions of grants, hiding evidence, and friends at the state, and falsifying logs. It was all there. Principal Mark Stevens, seeing the writing on the wall, had actually taken a plea deal before trial in exchange for testifying to the involvement of higher-ups. So he testified as well, apologizing to parents, but the courtroom's mood toward him was cold. He admitted he had put the school's potential funding and his career ambition above the welfare of students. His regrets seemed genuine through tears, but many felt it was too little too late. Still, his information helped nail the bigger fish. Finally, after a 4-week trial, the verdict came in. John Reid, guilty on all major counts: conspiracy, child endangerment, fraud. He was later sentenced to 15 years in prison and hefty fines. Dr. Victor Hale, guilty. He got 10 years. Superintendent and Senator Pierce tried separately later, both guilty, and both faced prison time. Pierce 5 years for corruption, the superintendent 7 years. Principal Stevens, due to plea, he got a reduced sentence of 3 years in prison and 10 years barred from any educational work. Bright Horizons as a company was defunct, and a victims' compensation fund was established from its remaining assets and insurance. Each affected child's family, about 50 families, received settlements for medical checkups and damages. Dawn ensured that the Patels and others who had been silenced got their NDA voided and could speak freely now. When the verdict was read, Dawn sat in the courtroom next to Sophie, who was not present for the gruesome testimonies but was there for the conclusion at Dawn's side, drawing in a coloring book through the boring parts. As he heard guilty on each count, he closed his eyes, letting out a breath he felt he'd been holding for months. Tears rolled down his face silently. Sophie looked up at him. She was too young to grasp all details, but she knew the bad people had been punished, and she hugged him around his waist. He lifted her onto his lap right there in the audience and held her tight, whispering, "We did it, sweetie." "It's over," Sophie, in her innocence, whispered back. "Does this mean no one will hurt kids at my school again?" Dawn kissed her forehead, voice thick. "That's right, they won't. Not ever again if I can help it." Across the aisle, Catherine Abbott dabbed her eyes with a tissue. She had been spared prison due to her cooperation, though her teaching license was suspended pending review. Dawn caught her eye and gave a small nod of gratitude. In return, she mouthed, "Thank you." They both knew that in the strangest way, they had saved each other. Dawn saved her soul from being forever weighed by guilt, and she helped save Sophie and the other children. The villains had faced justice. The climax that began in a school cafeteria ended in a court of law, with the truth acknowledged and consequences dealt. Dawn felt closure as he walked out of the courthouse into the autumn sun, Sophie's small hand in his. Reporters clamored outside for comment, and Dawn, holding Sophie in his arms, simply said, "I'm grateful. Grateful that the truth prevailed and our children are safe. This has been about protecting our kids, that's all." Cameras flashed, capturing the image of a father protecting his daughter, the image of an ordinary man who stood up against wrongdoing and won. He didn't feel triumph in a boastful way. It was more a profound sense of relief and justice. The nightmare was over, and life could finally move forward. 6 months later, it was now spring of 2026. The scandal, while still echoing in education discussions, had begun to fade from daily headlines. In Glendale, life found a new normal. Don Parker's life, however, had been deeply changed by the ordeal, mostly for the better. He had become something of a local hero. Many parents in the community saw him as the dad who fought for all their kids. At first, the attention was overwhelming. He'd get stopped at the grocery store by strangers saying thank you, or receive letters in the mail from parents across the country sharing their own school concerns, inspired by his story. Don remained humble through it all, often replying personally when he could. He returned to a quieter life intentionally. After the trial, Don had taken a few months off work. His employer, to their credit, gave him paid leave and used his story in an internal newsletter about integrity. But ultimately, Don decided not to go back to sales. He found a new calling. With the settlement money he received, he donated most of Sophie's portion to a children's health charity. After setting aside some for her college and connections he'd made, he started working with a nonprofit organization that advocated for ethical practices in schools. He took a modestly paid position as a community outreach coordinator, traveling occasionally to speak at PTA meetings and school board conferences about the importance of transparency and parental involvement. He even testified in Harrisburg, the state capital, in support of a new Safe Schools Act, legislation inspired by what happened at Brookside, requiring parental consent and independent oversight for any special programs in schools. It passed unanimously, and part of it included protections for whistleblowers like teachers who come forward about student safety issues. As for Sophie, she transferred to a different elementary school in the neighboring town the next school year. Brookside Elementary underwent a clean sweep, a new principal, some staff changes, and certainly no more secret programs. But Don felt it was better for Sophie to have a fresh start without the weight of being that kid from the scandal in the halls. She adjusted well to her new school, making new friends and loving her new teacher. Don drove her an extra 15 minutes each morning, but he didn't mind. Each ride was a reminder of how precious her well-being was. Emotionally, the father and daughter grew even closer. Don was more open with Sophie in age-appropriate ways about life's challenges and encouraged her to always speak up if something felt wrong. They began a new tradition every Friday family lunch, where Dawn would pick her up from school and they'd go to a little diner or park picnic, just the two of them. It was a ritual born from that fateful school lunch incident, now transformed into something positive, a celebration of their bond and open communication. Catherine Abbott, after a period of public scrutiny, moved away and eventually regained her teaching credentials with a lot of conditions. She wrote a heartfelt letter to Dawn and Sophie before leaving, saying she was pursuing a different career path, counseling, actually, and thanking them for helping her find courage. Dawn replied kindly, wishing her healing and growth. The community of Glendale also learned from the event. The top became more active. Parents showed up to school board meetings in larger numbers, demanding transparency. In a way, what was meant to secretly harm ended up strengthening the community's vigilance and care for its children. One bright Saturday morning, Don found himself sitting on a bench watching Sophie play at the park. She was 9 now, laughing as she chased a butterfly with a friend. Don sipped his coffee and reflected. This quiet scene of children playing freely was something he no longer took for granted. He scrolled through his phone and saw a news notification. Another school district in a different state was implementing new oversight policies, citing the Parker case as a cautionary tale. He felt a swell of pride, not for himself, but knowing that what he went through was helping protect other families now. The ripples of his actions were still expanding in a good way. His reverie was broken when Sophie ran up, slightly out of breath, face flushed with joy. "Daddy, can we get ice cream?" she asked, eyes hopeful. He chuckled, checking his watch. "It's only 11 a.m., Soph." She gave him that adorable grin. "Pretty please." "It's almost lunchtime, and we can have ice cream before lunch just this once." Don shook his head in mock exasperation, but couldn't resist. All right. You win." He stood and lifted her briefly, spinning her playfully as she squealed. Setting her down, he looked into those bright eyes that were happy and carefree as they should be. That was his true victory. As they walked toward the ice cream truck, Sophie holding his hand and skipping, Don thought about the journey of the past year. So much had changed. He had changed. He had learned profound lessons about vigilance, courage, and the responsibility we have to stand up when something's wrong, no matter how powerful the wrongdoers seem. He knelt down to tie Sophie's shoelace and asked her, "You doing okay, sweetie? You happy?" She nodded vigorously and surprised him with a tight hug around his neck. "You're the best dad." "I love you," she declared. Don's throat tightened with gratitude. "I love you too, Sophie." More than anything, in that embrace, he realized that all the trauma and drama had forged something unbreakable in both of them. They had faced fear and injustice and come out the other side. Stronger and more compassionate. Standing up, Don felt the warmth of the sun on his face, a sense of peace washing over him. He had once thought revenge on those who hurt Sophie would feel sweet. In truth, what he felt now wasn't glee at their punishment. It was satisfaction that right had been done, and a hopeful resolve to keep doing what's right. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's turning what was meant to destroy you into something that heals others. Don had transformed his anger and pain into action, protecting not only his child but many others, and in doing so, he found a new purpose and a sense of healing from his own loss and fears. As father and daughter strolled off to enjoy their early ice cream, laughter and sunshine surrounding them, it was clear that out of a dark chapter had come a brighter future. Don Parker learned that being a parent meant fighting for your child no matter the odds, and being a decent human meant using truth as a weapon against injustice. The moral of his story would echo in that town for years. Stand up for what's right, protect the innocent, and cherish the loved ones you fight for. Asterisk, if you enjoyed this story, please like the video, comment what you would have done, and subscribe for more.